Appreciate everybody being here. Christine Clark is a sports nutritionist, dietitian. Does talks about the impact of sports nutrition, not only on your performance, but a healthy lifestyle. So welcome to Mrs. Clark.
Thank you for having me. So as I mentioned, I'm a sports dietitian. I work at Northeastern University, so I work with athletic teams there. I also have a private practice where I also do with younger adults with that as well. And a little background on that. So today I'm going to cover nutrition for peak performance. So obviously, being an athlete, you want to make sure that you're performing at your best. If you're not eating properly or you're not hydrating properly, it can affect your performance overall. I'm sure many of you have noticed that before. You may not exactly know why, but maybe today I can kind of cover those topics and something might stick out that you're like, oh yeah, maybe I should work on that. And so hopefully you'll get something out of this today. So there is a definite connection between nutrition and your athletic performance, for sure. There is a definite connection there. And we'll talk about that throughout. So my main goal today would be to have you think about taking food as fuel for your activities, for your training, competition, and also for helping to repair and build your muscles after you've worked out and after practice and games. And also thinking about eating frequently throughout the day versus, going long periods of time without eating, making sure that you're not skipping meals or because you're so busy you don't have anything with you or you didn't plan ahead. So things like that are things we'll talk about because that's important. And then also the importance of incorporating carbohydrates, proteins, and then healthy fats into your meals and snacks each day. So I'll go through, the importance of protein in your food intake, carbohydrates, and go through each one and sort of where you're going to get those sources. And as I go through, if anybody has questions, please feel free to raise your hand, or I'll definitely have time at the end if you have questions. So obviously, without proper nutrition, you will find that you have a decline in your sports performance overall. You'll feel really tired. You might feel like, just really sluggish and you're not feeling your best. Other thing is you may end up with illnesses or you might get injured. So you don't want to be injured because then you're going to miss out on either part of your season or all of your season. And if you can avoid that by eating properly and taking care of yourself, that's so important. One thing I do want to talk about, because a lot of people tend to focus on protein because it will build muscles. So most people feel like if I eat a lot of protein, I'll build strong muscles. Anybody? Sure. Maybe. That's typically what I find with students I meet with at Northeastern is that, we're going to eat a lot of protein, we're going to gain a lot of muscle, and actually the reality is that you eat a right amount of protein and you do a lot of hard work, which I'm sure you do in practice and in your games and working out, and that's how you build strong muscles, and making sure you're getting adequate carbohydrates too, and we'll talk about that. So a lot of times people cut down or remove carbohydrates like grains, rice, pasta, breads because they think like, oh, well, I don't want that, I want to have all my protein, beets, and things like that so that I can build my muscles, when in reality you need both, and you need a good combination of that. And then that's something to think about. And a lot of times, maybe not so much at this level, but sometimes people are doing protein supplements and they may not need them. Like they'll add them to a drink or milk or water, something like that. It may not be necessary if you're getting enough from food. So now I'll talk about the importance of protein. It's not a major fuel source, and what do I mean by that is that you don't use it as an energy source. So when you're running, you're working out, you're not using that as an energy source. Protein is for building, repairing your muscles, and it's also part of all of your bones, your teeth, all of that. So it's important for that and also for your immune system, but it's not a source of energy, it's for your body. So you want to make sure that you concentrate on your protein needs, but you also want to make sure that you have enough carbohydrates from rice, pasta, grains, so that you're not using protein as an energy source, because sometimes that happens. And then if you're taking in excessive amounts of protein, sometimes people take in like twice the amount of protein that they need or more than that, and that's not helpful because you're not going to actually build stronger muscles that way. So, something to think. I'm going to give you a list of some protein sources after this. But so After you work out, you want to make sure you have protein though. That's when you want to have your protein, not necessarily like loading up on protein before a workout. You want to have it after your workout, and the reason for that is the muscle protein synthesis, so that's basically building your muscles back up. So you're tearing down your muscles when you're working out after you just had a practice, so it'd be important to make sure you have some protein after this, if you haven't already. So, you know, at least 10 grams, and that's like kind of the minimum, so you want to at least have that. You know, the research doesn't show that you don't have to have a whole ton of it. You don't need to have like 30, 40 grams. If you're having a meal, then that may be what you have, and that's fine, but you don't have to have a load of it. You just have to have enough. So you don't need to take in high amounts, because that can also put you at risk for dehydration, and that's something you don't want to do, especially if you're in a game and practice. You don't want to become dehydrated. You can become dehydrated not just during the hot summer months when it's really hot out and you're sweating a lot. You can become dehydrated all year long. So thinking about that too. So that's something to think about. So these are the protein sources. Many of you may be fully aware of where protein comes from. Sometimes people question it. But you know, eggs are a great source of protein. Low-fat milk is a great source. Even chocolate milk. A lot of times that's what we use the athletes that I work with. That's sort of their recovery drink, is chocolate milk or flavored milk. If you don't like chocolate, plain milk, something on that works. And then obviously yogurt, cottage cheese, peanut butter is always good. So if you had like a peanut butter sandwich or something like that afterwards, or you know, there's also other sources of protein here for meals. So those are just some others there. And then the importance of carbohydrates would be that carbohydrates, which are found in breads, pasta, cereal, things like that, that's what's used for energy. Your body wants carbohydrates to be used as an energy source. So that's its number one fuel. So if you have enough of that, you're going to feel like you have more energy. If you kind of cut that out and really increase your protein, it's not going to give you the same effect. So you need both. You don't want to do overload on anything. But so something to think about before a practice or a game, about 3 to 4 hours ahead of time is when you want to have that kind of bigger meal. You know, for instance, I don't know, when do you guys play certain games? Like at night mostly, or? Yeah, so you wouldn't want to have a big meal at like 6 o'clock, you know, or 5:30. You might want to have a smaller meal. But, you know, say at like 4 o'clock, you could maybe 4:30. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. You know, you can't plan it exactly. But if you have like a really large meal before your game, you may feel really weighed down. So you may want to have something a little bit more, like if it's, say you have about an hour before your game or practice, you want to have something that's lower in fiber, lower in fat, lower in protein, and more high in carbohydrates. And a big reason for that is because you do not want to end up with an upset stomach. Because what happens if it's too close to your game or practice, what's happening is your body wants to digest that food. So now your body's putting energy towards digesting the food, and you don't want that. You want to be using that energy that from the food that's broken down as an energy source to be able to run and be able to, you know, do what you need to do. So you don't want to, you want to think about that too. That's a big component of that. So you don't want to eat too close those big meals to a practice or a game, because you may not feel great. Has anyone ever done that before? You eat like a really big meal and you go to practice and you're like, I don't feel very good. Some people end up throwing up because they just ate. So your body hasn't digested it, so it doesn't feel very good. So that's something to think about. So planning it around that. So if you have practice, then you go home and have a bigger meal, that makes sense. But if you're having it before you go to practice, then it can be tricky or eating. So yeah, so, and then if you only have about 30 minutes and you are going to practice and you're like, I'm starving, I'm so hungry, you can do things that are gonna go quickly. You could do like a Gatorade or something that's really fast to eat, something for a cereal, something like that that's gonna digest quickly, that's not gonna upset your stomach. So that's something to think about. And then after your workout, you do wanna make sure you replace have like a recovery thing with the carbohydrates and protein. And these are just some examples of where you're going to get those carbohydrates, because I keep saying carbohydrates, but most people are familiar with it, but oatmeal, cereal, rice, pasta, different kinds of yogurts, low-fat yogurt, milk has carbohydrates too. But the good thing about milk, and that's why it's a great recovery drink, is because it has both protein and carbohydrates, which is a benefit. Same with yogurt. Other options for carbohydrates would be your beans and potatoes, baked potato, some of your fruits too, obviously. So those are obviously good choices as well. And then just kind of throwing this in here, it's important to incorporate good fats into your plan, your eating, because you want to make sure you're absorbing your fat soluble vitamins and things like that. That's important. And also it protects your body from injury. It acts like an insulator, so that's important. And we'll talk about where those good fats come from. Things like spinol oils, corn oils, olive oil, fish, avocados, pumpkin seeds, and things like that. Peanut butter, it's always a good choice. So those are some just ideas on that. We'll spend a lot of time on that piece. But the importance of vitamins and minerals. So many times people, drink vitamin water and different things, and you want to make sure you're eating some vitamins and minerals in your fruits and vegetables. So vitamin C is important for, I have up here like bones and cartilage, which is like, well, yeah, whatever. But that's part of your whole joints and your ligaments, all that stuff. So vitamin C is important for that. So incorporating some good sources of vitamin C would be oranges, strawberries, peppers, potatoes, believe it or not. Sweet potatoes and regular potatoes actually do contain vitamin C. So those are good sources of that. And then also making sure that you're taking in enough calcium and magnesium. Both of those things are helpful with bones and as well as muscle contraction. So if you are somebody who takes in a lot of dairy, but some of you don't, maybe some of you don't, it can affect muscle contractions and it can cause cramping if you don't have enough calcium. Those are the things that you have to think about. The other thing that can cause cramping, and I think I covered this in another slide, is dehydration. If you're not hydrated enough, that can cause muscle cramping. Again, sort of if you're doing too much protein, not getting enough of other things and not having that balance, that can cause muscle cramping. But again, calcium is a big one. If you're somebody who doesn't necessarily drink milk and you don't like it or you can't have it, then you can always find a non-dairy milk substitute that will have some calcium, because calcium is really important for that. So if you had questions on that, I can help you find some sources of that, or you can do a calcium and vitamin D supplement if necessary, depending. But usually getting it from food is better. If somebody were to have an iron deficiency or anything like that, it's not always very typical, but it can happen, and that can affect performance because you may feel very tired. Sometimes you may not realize it. So that's something, good sources of that would just be cereal, meats, chicken, beans, spinach, broccoli, things like that. So that's sort of vitamins and minerals. So that kind of, that piece of it. So being hydrated is really important, and thinking about your fluid loss. So you do lose a lot of fluid, whether it's hot out, not hot out, you're sweating, you can feel it. So you want to replace it because you do lose a lot of water through sweat. And being dehydrated, you may not feel thirsty actually. You might actually not feel thirsty right away. That's not your first symptom. If you feel thirsty, you're already kind of moving into being dehydrated. So you want to think about, sometimes you feel extremely tired and you don't know why. That could be part of being dehydrated. You end up losing muscle strength. So if you're dehydrated, you may, again, not feel thirsty, but you're not able to do what you normally do. You just feel really, really tired. That could be part of it. You may have cramping in your muscles. That could be another symptom. But it may not be all those symptoms. So it's important to be aware of being hydrated, making sure you're drinking enough water. I think on the next slide it talks about before, during, and after when you're working out. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the other piece of it is trying to avoid things like soda, coffee, tea, because those things can tend to not make, help with hydration status. So it may increase a little bit of water loss, not significant, but if there's a lot of caffeine, sometimes that can act as like, it kind of increases your water loss. So something to think about there. Yeah. So drinking water before, during, and after. But when you're drinking it during, try not to guzzle water. Even though you might be like, oh, I'm so thirsty, I have to drink this water. Do not guzzle it. You wanna know why? Because it doesn't feel good. Because then your stomach is full of water and it's just gonna slosh around and it feels gross. So try to think smaller sips throughout, not like, oh, I'm gonna chug this water because that's what I'm supposed to do. It won't feel very good. So try to do it in small increments when you can. Obviously you're out there playing, you're not gonna be like drinking water. But when you're off to the side and you have a chance, have a little bit of water, a couple sips, a couple ounces. A few sips, it turns into a few ounces. So you don't need to drink like 6 ounces or 8 ounces at a time. That will make you not feel great. So again, having it before you go to practice, a little bit during, and then after for sure, because you do lose a lot. The other thing I'm gonna say is that if you're noticing, it's kind of a weird thing, but if you notice that your urine is bright yellow, good indication you likely dehydrated, close to it anyway. So think about that too. You're like, okay, now I need to make sure that I'm drinking enough water. So that's something to think about. Again, this is just driving home the point that you can lose up to 2 or more quarts of fluid in every hour of activity. So it's something to think about. That's kind of a lot of water. So again, I know I said it before, but hydrating during, before, and after is really important. And again, you don't need to go overboard. It's just something to think about. And if you notice, like you've ever had any, I was tired or I didn't feel that great, think about your fluid intake for the day. You want to make sure you're drinking water throughout the day too when you're in school. Don't forget about that if you can, or have a refillable water bottle. Sports drinks. So I noticed a lot of you have Gatorades and a few sports drinks, which are great, especially if your practice goes longer than an hour, hour and a half. Those are a great way to replenish those. That you sodium potassium, because when you sweat, that's what comes out. Like I'm sure you've had the chance when you sweat and you have that grainy feeling on your head. That's the sodium coming out in your sweat. So that's when those sports drinks are very useful. You don't need to drink them all the time. And if you're not working out and you didn't just work out, you don't necessarily need a Gatorade. Water is a great choice. You don't have to do Gatorade when you're not working out. It's not necessary. You can if you really like it, but it's not necessary. Vitamin waters or enhanced waters, what I say about that is they're just expensive and they have all these extra nutrients in them, and you don't want to be overdoing any nutrients. So most often they're water-soluble nutrients, so you're most likely just going to urinate them out. So they're really not that helpful all the time. So eating the food that contains those vitamins and minerals would be your better option, and then having water and then having Gatorade are those options when that opportunity comes up. So the vitamin waters aren't necessarily that useful. Something to think about with different sports drinks and other juices, if they have what's called fructose or high fructose corn syrup in them, what might happen too is it might upset your stomach. So that's just something to look at when you're looking at the label. Something to think about. And energy bars. A lot of people will choose energy bars or sports Cliff bars or different things. They can be great, especially if you're busy and especially if you're coming from after school going to practice. You definitely want to have something that you can take with you, keep in your bag that doesn't spoil. So those are always a great thing to keep with you. And before practice, you want to try to find one that's lower in protein and fat and higher in carbohydrates. And if you needed one for recovery and you knew you weren't going to be home for a little while or you had something to do, you try to carry a couple in your bag, one kind of before, one for after, and think about that way. So that one could be one that has higher protein for after, but before you want to do more of the carb-based. And you want to look out for ones that, you don't want to have ones that are high in a lot of extra oils and fats. It's not necessary. And you don't want to get a lot of the ones that have a lot of extra ingredients in them, like caffeine or ephedra, especially if you're eating it before you're working out. I don't recommend them later, but if you do decide to choose one of those things, really think about it, because you don't want to be having a lot of caffeine before you go into exercise, because now you're already sort of, your heart's pumping. You don't need the extra caffeine from one of those drinks or a bar. Not the best idea. So that's just something to think about. So just get the run-of-the-mill ones that have some carbs, some protein, and think about it that way. All right, so obviously the fuel thing, and I'm sure you've heard this before, your body is like a car. If you don't fuel your body properly, it's not going to function properly. Just like if you don't put gas in the car, it's not going to go. You can tell when there's low gas in a car because it just kind of moves along just a little bit slower, which is what your body's going to do. So you have to think about fueling your body and taking care of yourself. So when you get up in the morning, making sure you're eating something. A lot of people will say, well, I'm not hungry in the morning, I don't really like to eat anything. Anything's better than nothing. So having something small is a good idea. Take it with you if you don't want to eat right when you wake up. Making sure you have things with you for snacks. Obviously between meals it's a little harder when you're in school, I know that, but at lunch make sure you're eating something that's going to fuel your body, and it's a good choice. And then after school you could choose some of these things that would be helpful, like some fruit, some pretzels, anything that you like that's sort of higher in carbohydrates before you go to practice, because you don't want to be going to practice hungry. Have you ever done that before? So not fun. So then you don't feel great, you're hungry, then you might actually get a little crabby, a little mad people. So really try to think about eating something. It's important. And then kind of when you're eating lunch and dinner, so during the day when you're in school, thinking about your food choices, try to think like, oh, I'm gonna have a protein, I'm gonna have a carbohydrate, and maybe a fruit or vegetable. I need to have my balance. Thinking about that. So trying to think like some options would be, I don't know, if you bring your lunch, you could do turkey sandwiches, you could do something with a piece of fruit, you could do peanut butter if you can have that. So there's all kinds of things you could have that are sort of that combination. But thinking about combinations of foods to fuel your body. And again, timing of meals and snacks is extremely important. I know I sort of covered it with the carbohydrates, but again, it's really, you want to choose foods that are easy to digest before you work out, before a game. Again, you don't want to be eating too close something that's going to upset your stomach. And you can do this as trial and error. Some people are like, oh, it doesn't bother me at all. But other people, it will bother you. And maybe you don't realize that's what was bothering you, or you just kind of felt sort of off, or you didn't feel good. So those are things you can do ahead of time. And then after practice, after games, making sure that you're replenishing those stores of carbohydrates so that you have energy again for later, and also protein so that you're building back those muscles that you used. Because again, you don't want to use your muscles as an energy source. So those are just some suggestions for things that you can have after. That's not anything set in stone. You can kind of pick things that you like. That's what you should do. You don't want to pick foods that you don't enjoy. Okay, so I know I mentioned breakfast briefly, but it is really important. And it's important because it improves your energy at the start of your day. So when you get to school, if you haven't had breakfast, how many times have you maybe not had breakfast because you just were rushing, you didn't have time? It's going to improve your focus and performance in school, and that's important, staying focused. Also will help with sports performance. And it also will help, so if you found that maybe you didn't eat breakfast, you had like a really light lunch, and then maybe you go to practice, and then you get home and you're just so hungry, you don't even know what to eat, what to do, you're just starving. And then you overdo it, and then you feel kind of sick, because you're like, oh, now I'm so full, I don't feel good. So that's why having that sort of balance throughout the day, you know, have some breakfast, have some lunch, have a snack after school, go to practice, go home and eat dinner, versus sort of that not eating for a long period of time, and then you get really, really hungry, and then you just don't feel great. So that's important to sort of space that out and have that consistency if you work in that. And again, I know I said anything is better than nothing. It is really true. When you think, oh, I don't really want to eat breakfast, I don't have time. Grab a cereal bar, dry cereal, a piece of fruit, anything. Walking out the door, something, eat something, it's important. So this is just some examples, and again, everybody is different, so what might work for you might not work for you, just because everybody's different. What they like for food, what the amounts that they need varies depending on a lot of things. So this is just to give you sort of a guide of things to think about, like, oh, okay, maybe I'll try to do something with some fruit, maybe I'll have toast with peanut butter, or, you know, maybe I'll have a granola bar, or I'll have a bowl of cereal, or I'll have toast with eggs. You know, different things that you can do, just try to think about it. In the morning, obviously, if you're someone that doesn't wake up very early and you just kind of get out the door, that may not be the best option, but you want to think about something else. Or a smoothie is always a good choice in the morning. If you have something to make a smoothie, you can buy frozen fruit, and then you can grab some yogurt or milk, put it in a blender, and you can go. So you can find some good, you know, different recipes, or you can just throw things in you like. Throw in some peanut butter, banana, whatever it might be, getting some protein, and then you might feel better during the day. Again, lunch, just thinking about a sandwich or something that has some rice or pasta, and then some protein, and then some fruit or vegetable. It's important. Same kind of thing with dinner. Again, snack options. We've kind of covered that. Okay, so this is one thing. I like to kind of throw this in here because being mindful, and many of you may be aware of doing this, but slowing down when you eat is so important. Many people tend to, a lot of students I meet with eat within like 10 minutes. They're like, oh, I just eat really fast, I gotta go, I'm busy. Slow down. I know that, you know, obviously if you're running out the door, you don't have time, but when you do have that time, really slow down when you're eating and really think about it. Okay, I really shouldn't eat the time. Try to stretch that out, because it takes about 20 minutes for your stomach to register to your brain that you're actually full. So if you eat in 10 minutes, in 20 minutes, you might be like, wow, I'm really full. So something to think about. And not eating when you're distracted, like watching TV, using your phone, the computer. Try to, you know, avoid doing that, because well, like I said, I work at Northeastern, I'll walk in the dining hall and there's everybody just on their phones at the table and just not, they're eating and just distracted. Obviously people will do it and it's, but for the majority of the time, if you can just focus on your meal, that's a good thing. Because many times I'm sure you've done this where you're like doing something else and you're eating and then you're like, where did it go? Oh, I ate it. Okay. So you gotta think about what is, what you're eating. Being mindful, paying attention to when you are hungry. That's a big one. If you are hungry, make sure you eat something. When you're full, kind of check in with yourself and see where you're at. That's important. Which brings me to the next piece, which again, being mindful, feeling hungry. Obviously, sometimes you not realize that you're hungry because some people will say, well, I don't actually have hunger pains. I don't feel that when I'm hungry. I'm just so busy, I don't even notice. Well, then pay attention to the fact that maybe it's been 3 or 4 hours since you've eaten. So then you're like, oh, I'm not really feeling hungry, but it's been a while. I probably should have something. But if you start feeling tired, faint, cranky, it's a big one, then you want to make sure you eat something. And because you don't really ever want to be at starving at 0. You really don't want to be at 0, really, ever, because that's when you end up getting into a situation where you eat something that you really didn't even want because you're just so hungry and that's the only thing you could find. So that's why it's important to carry snacks with you, bring things with you, especially for after school, again, for school, for breakfast, things like that. Just thinking about it, really putting in a little bit of time and effort into your nutrition will really help you overall with your sports, with just focus in school. It's really important. Sometimes you're like, yeah, but when you actually think about it and you do it, you're like, oh, actually, I do feel better. I didn't feel very good, now I do. I've had many students who are like, well, I just don't eat breakfast, or I just go and I just go to my practice and I do this, and then they'll start to do it, and then they're like, I actually feel better, and I'm going to continue to do this. So you may find that just some small change will make a big difference for you. So tips for achieving a performance menu for when you're eating, for eating. Planning ahead of time, not, trying to think about like putting some snacks in your bag, thinking about what you might want to eat before or after a practice or a game. And again, you don't need to do this forever and ever. If you start thinking about it now and you start putting a little bit of effort into it, it's just going to be second nature and you're just going to start to do it. So that's something to think about too. And eating regularly, and like I said, if you're somebody who maybe you think, oh, well, I don't always feel hungry, and it's been like 4 hours, you should eat something. Don't try not to go too long. 3 hours is sort of that rule of thumb, like, oh, I probably should have something to eat if it's been that long. Definitely 4 is pushing it. So you want to think about that. So takeaways would be to think of food as fuel for daily activities, sports, building, repairing your muscles, eating meals and snacks throughout the day. That helps to support growth and fueling for activities, so that's important. And then including those carbohydrates, proteins, and fats during your meals and snacks. I know I sort of covered that a lot in the beginning, but that is so important to do that combination and not being too heavy on one versus the other. So having that combination of those carbohydrates, proteins, and fats is important. And not, thinking, oh, I just need the protein, I don't need those carbs. They are the key to that energy source.